policy is developed against domestic violence, then their feelings regarding job security will not be wounded. Now, last but not least, would like to speak about the violent behavior of male. Of all the male attending and joining the survey, 5% in fact specified that they were exposing their wives to a behavior that is related to use of force. In fact, the in fact, in a company, if there is no policy related to gender equality, in fact, we see that the male declare more that they are demonstrating some behavior that is or that can be categorized as violence. And when we look at these results, the corporate policies that are developed against domestic violence have a potential to affect the behavior of working men. In this study, we also clearly understood the negative impacts of working from home on women during the pandemic, and that increased the household chores a lot on women, and we provided some suggestions to the companies, for example, sharing the policy and application channels, and reviewing the existing policy and internal application channels. The managers to be informed about the indications of violence, keywords to be defined against emergencies, because women sometimes cannot benefit from technology or other technological means, and also women working from home need some work and life balance, and corporate support might be nice for this. And of course, increased workload of women should be taken into consideration in the performance assessment. I'm not going to speak about it details now because we're going to have a panel session to cover all these details. I was planning to finish in 15 minutes, but I have exceeded my time. I'm sorry about this. Now I would like to give the floor to our project stakeholders. And firstly, before I give the floor to our stakeholders, let me inform that if you have any questions, you can type in your questions, because both writers of the report will be on the panel, and also we will upload the report so that you can download it. Currently, the Turkish version is available only in 2 weeks on our website. The English version will also be accessible for you. Thank you very much. Now, I would like to give the floor to our stakeholders for their commentaries. First, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Hasan Muhtashemi, UNFPA Turkey representative. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. Merhaba, and greetings to all friends and colleagues on this call. And thank you for having us be part of this as well. I really appreciate that. Thank you for outstanding presentations, Sabra Khanum, and we appreciate the work. Let me just first thank not only the report writers, but all our committed and passionate partners, the Sabancı University Corporate Governance Forum, TUSIAD, Sabancı Foundation, and all other participating companies in BADV, and we are very grateful and honored to be part of this discourse and be contributing some pennies of thoughts in this work. Thank you so very much. Just few reflections on my side. I think first of all, the report again shows that like any other aspects of the life, crisis also affect women and men differently. And whatever the inequality is there, any type of crisis simply deepen the inequality, and that's what we see. We globally, we have reported at UNFPA increased domestic violence against women at the time of pandemic. We also noticed alarmingly reduced access, limited access of women to sexual and reproductive health information and services at the time of pandemic. In fact, we see many places unmet need for contraceptives is increasing, and that's an alarming factor. And it is coupled with other deepening economic and social stress. So that's the situation that we see it in line with the findings of the report. But the good part of this report shows that at least those companies that are working in this area with outstanding support by Savanci and others, these companies have rightly addressed the issue at the core. And the people, women who work in these companies experience less stress and less violence and the like. So that's the good part of it. And it's important that these findings to be distributed as widely as possible and expand the BADV network, that private sector play an active role in ensuring gender equality, combating violence against women, promoting sexual and reproductive health and rights of women. Those are elements that make significant change in the life of women, particularly women who work and part of the labor force. Another reflection on this report is that actually the report shows the job is not done yet. We have a long way to go, and we need to intensify our effort to ensure that these any elements of domestic violence is eliminated and continue on to build on the momentum that we have already created, and making sure that the voices, experiences, and the needs of women at work is clearly articulated and held by everybody, including the managers and principals of the private sector companies. Let me reiterate that we are so proud of being partner of this outstanding initiative. I should say I'm old enough. I've served in 8 different countries with UNFPA, and beyond that worked in 30 more countries with other organizations. I should say this project, Turkish private sector, should be extremely proud of this project. It's an important, innovative, and a groundbreaking project. And we congratulate all the partners and funders of this, and we are proud to be part of it. And we will be more than happy to continue to support and be partnering in this exercise. And we would like also to propose that we look into more of some elements that perpetuate the violence and other elements, including the sexual and reproductive health and rights of women and the needs of the sexual and reproductive health and rights needs of women in the workplace. We at the global level have noticed that something like 12 million women have lost their access to contraception during the pandemic. That simply result to 1.4 million unintended pregnancies. And unintended pregnancy means either higher rates of abortions, unsafe abortions, or loss of jobs and work opportunities for women who are pregnant without their consent at the origin. So we suggest that we may even look beyond the violence and look at the other aspects and needs of the women in the workplace, including sexual and reproductive health and rights of women as it's articulated. We believe this will be addressing in the workplace, working with the business sector on violence against women, combating gender-based violence, combating and addressing the unmet need for family planning. It's not only a good thing to do, it's actually a smart thing to do, as they put it several times. It helps even the business sector and improve productivity, and then of course address the ideals of social responsibility in the private sector. Again, we are so proud to be part of this process. Please count on us, count us in. We will be with you until you kick us out. I hope you don't kick us out. We will be more than happy to be part of the process and be supportive of the process. Thank you so very much for the report and inviting us and having us in this meeting. Appreciate it. Thanks. Hand over back to you, Sevda Khanım.
Well, Mr. Hassan Muhtashami, thank you very much. And all the audience, I'm sure there are people from the press, the business world, the civil society. I would like to extend my greetings to all our audience. So we have been in this pandemic all together for more than 1 year. Most of us probably are connected to this platform today from our home. And we have very well seen that the homes are not very secure for women. In fact, I read the report with great happiness, and Sevda shared the details of the report, and I'm pleased because we have another very good reference. During the pandemic, we collected and acquired, and we were provided with a great deal of data at national and international level. We have been following many statistics, just like in all the crises. Even in this crisis, we know that some groups got more affected and some problems got deeper and deeper. And which were the groups that were more affected or highly affected? Of course, women and girls in particular. And today we are looking from the perspective of women, and there are very striking global figures. In fact, most of us are familiar with these figures, but maybe just to the benefit of our audience, we can share some figures with you. You know, UN Women, according to UN Women reports, all around the world, violence increased by at least 20%. This is one thing, and the other thing is related to early and forced marriages, and also the ratio of girls dropping to school. We see very significant increases in these as well. 47 million women and girls were dragged into extreme poverty all around the world. And I would like to add one national figure to all these figures. Today I was in a different panel. Canan Gülgün, the president of Women Associations Federation, shared this. And during this period, there was a 100% in the number of calls that were made by the women in the neighbors' houses, using the hotline. Sometimes the women couldn't even make the call, and the neighbors themselves made the call, and that number increased 100%. It's striking. And also during the pandemic, the sectors that are intensively employing the women got affected. For example, tourism, retail. These sectors were influenced much. But what about the healthcare? According to the international figures, in the healthcare sector, there are 70% of female labor. It means healthcare sector is affected a lot too. But today's topic is about the household chores and the workload at the house for the women. So for many years, the business and civil society have been working hand in hand in this project, and academia perspective is there, civil society perspective is there. This is a very unique project. In fact, this is not our first study. We had another study in 2019, which was also striking and interesting. And you remember the results of that year? And it was about, again, the corporations and companies. If in a company or corporate a policy is designed against domestic violence, then the employees of these corporations, in fact, have improved awareness as regards noticing a person who was victimized by violence, or they also had increased violence in distinguishing different types of violence. Another study, let me mention this because it's also very precious for many of us, that will be a reference document. And we will directly start sharing what we read and what we heard. As Sabancı Foundation, it is also mentioned, we have been walking on this path for many years. That journey has already been 47 years old, and on our journey, women and girls have always been there as a milestone, and we have been supporting this field with many projects, and we are a part of the project since 2013, and we're extremely happy about being a part of the project and contributing to this project. Well, about this report, in fact, we heard and saw the details, taking benefit of the slides, but I would like to underline what was most interesting for me. When I first read the report, nothing was a surprise to me because I already had some rough estimations, and I saw the proofs and evidences of my guesses. But anyway, some figures were still striking to me. First, let me talk about the feeling I got after reading this study. Increased workload for women at home, and increased home labor, and increased domestic violence. And in general, all these bring about some psychological problems like stress, and also some physical health conditions, physical health issues. Well, it's very interesting. Personally, I believe there is a very interesting finding in this report. A majority of women, specifically 62% of them, got exposed to at least one type of violence in the last 3 months. And it is mostly this psychological violence that they were exposed to. After this finding, there is something else. Men yelling, insulting, reprimanding, humiliating, and uttering these kinds of words. In fact, did this without knowing that that was a kind of violence that they were exposing. That was very interesting to me. I think it's the most interesting to me. So it is about lack of awareness as to what is violence. It's about lack of awareness to distinguish what is violence and what is not. There is another point, a second point, which is interesting to me personally. If a woman is exposed to violence, then at 50% ratio, they would like to go back to work. If they were not exposed to violence, they think that, okay, working from home is not so bad. 27% of women would like to go back to work. If they had some multiple choices, probably they would choose going to work for a few days of the week. But if women were victimized by violence, this ratio differs a lot. What we see here is that the houses, the homes, as I call it, are not so secure for them. Also, the level of education. If the education level is lower, then there is more violence against women. That result was expected, and it is proven here with the report. We heard the word distress or stress many times across the report. And what was the triggering factor? Household responsibilities proved to be an important source of stress. It is once again highlighted by this report. Well, For the companies being part of this project, we know that some support mechanisms have been implemented, and now we see how useful they prove to be. When the companies implemented this kind of mechanisms, they supported the resilience of women a lot. And of course, they are supporting active participation of women in labor force. That is an important finding. Well, here I would like to talk about the good things in the Sabancı group of companies. There were very good examples in the report. For example, lunch hours without a meeting, because women may need to prepare lunch for the kids, or, there could be some flexibility at the start and end of business hours, because they overlap with the breakfast hour or the dinner hours. If the women are given flexibility, that may prove to be nice, sometimes given the days off, not at weekends, but during the weekdays, that can be another good alternative. And this all is covered by the report. And this is about sensitivity of the corporate. And it is also possible to provide 724 support. Both psychological support and corporate support contributes a lot. And many useful recommendations are also provided in this report. And we see that these companies do something else. They do not only contribute to the equality of their employees, but also they contribute to social development and social justice. That's a huge contribution. Of course, as Sabancı, in all group of companies, there is a great pleasure about being a part of this project. I'm just mentioning it because we would like to set an example. This is a nice synergy that we have, and under one umbrella, we are walking in the same direction, which is quite important. I said that I had a rough guess about the findings of this report, but a rough guess is not always enough. You need to have some scientific study, scientific data, and since this is a scientific report, that can be a reference for many scientific platforms. We have many stakeholders here: TÜSİAD, UNFPA, our university, and many other contributors. Thank you very much for your precious support. That's all I can say. I'm excited. I'd like to hear more, and I am really eager to hear the panel, because we're going to hear different dimensions of this report. Economic, social, psychological, etc. So once again, I give my thanks and acknowledgement, and I would like to give the floor to Ms. Oya Ünlü. Stay safe and healthy. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Nevgin. Hello, everyone. It's very nice to be with you. I wish we could be together physically, but it's still very nice to see you on the screen. I'd like to thank UNFPA and Sabancı Foundation managers, the representatives of the businesses, and I'd like to thank panelists, academics, nerd ones, and all the audience. Welcome and greetings from my side. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody who has made an effort in preparation of this important report, because this report covered the impacts of the pandemic period, especially on working women. So there are some observations that I have to make. First of all, pandemic impacted the women workers a lot, and women workers, employees had to shoulder a biggest portion of the household responsibilities. And also we can see that working women experience less stress if they are working for businesses who are providing them support, especially in the form of support mechanisms. And also the third observation that I have to make is as follows: women experiencing physical or sexual violence in the last 3 months at least half of them want to go back to their workplaces. They do not want to stay home because of the frequency of violence, domestic violence at home. So this report shows once again the impact of pandemic on the women. And this research is so much important, and I like to thank all the partners. Emel is with us. Thank you very much for your presence. She's going to be taking the floor in a moment. We also saw that the balance between personal life and working life has been distorted against the women. And most importantly, businesses, enterprises, they generally did not mobilize themselves to provide support mechanisms to their employees. And unfortunately, there were only 3 businesses which collected data when it comes to the exposure of violence among their employees. So I think we have to understand what kind of actions we have to take considering all of this. Let me summarize it this way. First of all, you cannot manage what you cannot measure. That's why if you want to come up with very effective interventions, then we have to measure all the negativities experienced by women. We have to make the negativities experienced by women visible. We need gender segregated data. We need to collect data, but in a gender segregated way. And I believe one of the most important contributions of BAD project to us all will be the collection of data. This research that we are launching today is based on data collection and gender segregation. This is so much important. And secondly, strategies and activities of the businesses combating gender inequality should continue, should be sustainable. Let me put it that way. Violence against women cannot be stopped if we cannot achieve gender equality. The roles and expectations from women and men should be changed. This hierarchy between men and women should be changed, should be eliminated, because this somehow creates discrimination against women in work life, in personal life, in everywhere actually. That's why we need to achieve a transformation starting from the employees of the businesses, the employers of the businesses, and businesses should adopt projects and policies in order to achieve gender equality, and they have to do gender mainstreaming in all their strategies. This can mobilize change at the level of community, at the level of society, and I believe this is a responsibility to adopt it. And especially businesses signing WEP's Women Empowerment Principles, and also businesses included in the project entitled Business Against Domestic Violence. They are trying to do something. They are making efforts in order to achieve gender equality, but the number of such businesses and enterprises should increase significantly. And lastly, I have to underline the collaborative activities among us all. In order not to deepen the gender inequality, in order not to experience in-depth inequalities in any segments of life, we have to join our forces. We can overcome the inequalities if we join forces as private sector, as NGOs, and as public sector actually. Especially when it comes to domestic violence, this is an area that we can join our forces. And this also requires the knowledge and collaboration from the side of the academics. Academics have huge accumulation of information about what could be done against domestic violence. So academics can be absolutely instrumental. In the light of all the knowledge and information, we can safely say that the public should join hands with the private sector and also NGOs and academic, and this is of critical importance, as you would appreciate. I cannot conclude my remarks without making reference to Istanbul Convention. As you know, unfortunately, domestic violence is aggravated, is so bad in our country, and unfortunately we spent a big majority of 2020 debating about Istanbul Convention, and we have to repeat once again that Istanbul Convention makes people live. We need Istanbul Convention. We need the enactment of the law numbered 6284 in Turkey in order to eliminate violence against women. We should never forget that the purpose of Istanbul Convention is to eliminate all forms of violence against women, because violence cannot be legitimized with any arguments, with any discourse possible. That's why we need to make Istanbul Convention be instrumental and be enforceable. If we do not eliminate violence, then we cannot achieve development in any segments, in any sectors in the country. We cannot develop as a country if we do not eliminate violence in the country, because violence against women is not a female issue. It is an issue of the whole community, of the whole country. As TÜSİAD, we are trying to make efforts in order to chip in the elimination of the violence against women. And we believe in the instrumentality of policies, public policies and procedures. That's why since 2015, we have been supporting this project entitled Business Against Domestic Violence. And we believe this project is a significant step in achieving elimination of violence against women. And every year we get on board more businesses, which is only hopeful on our side. And concluding my remarks, I like to thank everybody once again who has made an effort in doing this report and in launching this report, which is so much instrumental for us to understand the impacts of pandemic, especially on working women. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Oya, for the nice intervention. I'd like to thank all the partners, all the stakeholders on the screen. Well, I'd like to give the floor to Melsa Ararat, Sabancı University Corporate Governance Forum Director. She's going to lead the panel. The panel is called The Impact of Working from Home on Women, Lessons from the Pandemic. Ms. Melsa, you have the floor, ma'am, to moderate this session. Thank you. Ma'am, you have to unmute yourself. Yes. Hello, everyone. Nevgün, Oya, and Mr. Hassan, thank you very much. You encouraged us with your speeches. Thank you very much for the encouraging remarks that you had to make. This project is important for the business, for academic world, for NGOs and UN. And this research and this project is a shared outcome of us all, a shared product of us all. We can only create an impact when we are together. And thanks to this collaboration between us two, we believe we can put the results of this research into practice, recommendations into practice accordingly. On behalf of all the women, I'd like to thank everybody who has made an effort in making this research and launching this research today. Thank you. Well, about the results of this research, we are going to give the floor to people, very important panelists. But before that, our partners covered specifically the results of this research. I think need to summarize everything from the beginning. But the thing is, working from home and men and women being together in the household for longer times created big problems, especially on women. And unfortunately, women have been impacted more by the pandemic compared to men. This is the most striking result coming out of the research. Lots of pieces of research have been conducted about this, but this research specifically is distinguished because this research also looks at the policies and practices of the businesses when it comes to combating violence against women. Mr. Sevda, project manager, when she was telling us the results of the research, maybe some of you thought that some of the results and some of the differences between different groups of participants in the work were insignificant, maybe you thought. But what we need to do is we need to see how those results touch the lives of the women. And the thing is, businesses are just coming on board and adopting policies, permissive and conductive policies to help their women employees. And I think there is time needed for the businesses to make better progress in this area. Progress cannot be made without starting things. And I have to agree with Oya. We could achieve some achievements, if I may, with Istanbul Convention, but now women have to strive back again to take back their achievements, past achievements. Accordingly, businesses coming up with policies in this area and changing their institutional culture will require time. We have to wait, but we do not have to wait eternally, right? So I think we have to continue as willingly as possible, and we need to take on board businesses as required by the sustainable development in all the humanitarian development sectors. Businesses should be made an indispensable partner of NGOs and of the United Nations in general. This is what I believe, and this is how I feel in general. Social Humanitarian Development Index was launched and debated before this meeting. And in that launch event, once again, we saw that Turkey is one of the 66 countries with the highest humanitarian development. But when an adjustment is made for gender equality, Turkey is ranked 66th country instead of 54. So Turkey may be the 54th country when it comes to the high humanitarian development, but when it comes to gender equality, Turkey is ranking at the lowest, among one of the lowest countries in the index. And Turkey is number one in the area of violence against women by intimate partners. So this rate is 37% in Turkey when it comes to the experience of violence, physical violence by intimate partners. And after United Arab Emirates, Turkey follows United Arab Emirates when it comes to holding managerial positions by women. The thing is, gender equality and inequality brings about lots of other negativities in the sector of humanitarian development as well. Accordingly, today, we have to talk about domestic violence, especially experienced by working women. We have very important academics with us today, and I have today with me Mr. Mahmoud, my dear colleague that I've been collaborating for a long time. I'd like to give the first floor to him, to Mahmoud, because Professor Mahmoud, I believe will give us a wider perspective to this whole topic. So working from home during pandemic required lots of research, and some of the research came from your side. And what do you see in your research, in your personal research? What are the impacts of pandemic on different genders, and how the impacts of pandemic are gendered or not? Thank you very much, Melsa. Welcome everybody. I'd like to welcome everybody first of all. Greetings, all the greetings from my side. I see the other professors, Ayşen, Özge, Emel professors. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure for me to be in the same panel with you. As Melsa said, I conducted another research during the pandemic with the participation of İlknur and some other professors from Istanbul University in between May and July 2020 for 8 weeks. Approximately 100 and 60 people were engaged to obtain vertical data from their side. And we looked at similar topics. Actually, we didn't look at violence, but we looked at the balance between personal and work life, how the pandemic distorted the balance between personal and working life for the women. And let me share a couple of pieces of data with you, if I may, some concrete data, especially showing us how the problems experienced by women are striking, especially during pandemic. Among married and working women, 50% of the women with equal levels of careers as their husbands had to assume more household work compared to their husbands. So you might be having a great career at work, or you might be the only breadwinner of the household, but still as a woman you have to take on better responsibilities, more responsibilities in the household, and this rate is less than 5% among men. So only 5% of the men said that they have similar levels of similarly important career as their wife, and they were assuming more responsibilities in the household than their wives. Only 5%. Well, a big gap between men and women, and especially working women, full-time working women with children have to allocate 35 to 45 hours weekly for house chores, and the child is small, then this is more than 40 hours, and if they have at least 2 children, then at least 50 hours of household work are being conducted weekly by women. When it comes to spouses without children, the difference between men and women is 6 hours when it comes to assuming household responsibilities and the time for assuming household responsibilities. And in families with children less than 6 years old, then this gap is between 12 to 7 hours. Let me put it that way. If there's a small child or children in the household, then the gap between men and women becomes larger. You may think that in the presence of little children in the household, the husband would try to help with the children more. No, this is not the case. Women have to assume better responsibilities, more responsibilities for caring for the children. This way, men can allocate more time for themselves, for personal affairs. Men can attend to their own personal business, they can do sports, they can have chats with their friends, but this is not a possibility for the women, it seems. Especially if you are a mother of a child below the age of 6, then you can only allocate 60 hours weekly for yourself, including sleeping hours. And consider a white-collared employee working 7 days a week. Even that person can allocate 85 hours, personal hours, to himself or herself. So you might be working so hard in the workplace as a white-collared employee, but still you have more personal life for yourself compared to a woman with children, right? So what does it mean? It means for women, there is this distorted balance between personal and work life. So women, any woman may have to attend to a business while working from home, and immediately she has to leave that work, leave that business, and go and care for the kid. Women, when they're caring for the home, immediately they have to come back and sit in front of the computer and do their business, and this creates conflicts between spouses in the workplaces, and these conflicts are generally happening against the women with little children. As mentioned in the report previously, this brings about physical stress symptoms, psychological strain symptoms, especially despair, helplessness, and similar stress symptoms are increasing among the women. If there's a working woman with less income, with less autonomy in the workplace, then she would be more inclined to any of these problems which were listed previously. And let me give you some concrete data and put it that way. Research shows that 1 out of 4 women would like to continue working from home full-time, especially if she's not exposed to violence. But business or working from home may be problematic for women not experiencing violence at the moment, even that women, because managers who consider it a stigma for working from home may create some challenges, might create some challenges and put up some barriers for women who prefer to work from home, unfortunately. And as mentioned before, 80% of the women, they would like to continue from home, working from home at least a couple of days a week. And this is some 50% among the women who were exposed to violence in the home environment, in the household. And especially today, managers, HR, executives, experts, they have to find solutions to all these problems that we have been listing from the beginning. I think we're going to also cover the recommendations accordingly in a moment. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. Thank you. Thank you very much for your observations and for sharing the results of your research. Research shows that women also tend to quit jobs. They also tend to leave their works, quit their works. Turkey, by the way, let me put it that way, the workplace participation rate among women is 47% as average around the world, but this is 34% in women in Turkey, unfortunately. That's what I've heard today in the previous meeting that I made reference to, which us think about some structural and social problems, of course. And pandemic, on the other hand, aggravated all the problems, especially many women at working age have to quit their jobs because of the pandemic. I'd like to give the floor over to Ms. Emel in this respect. Ms. Emel, what do you make of it, this whole research? What are your observations for this in respect of this research? What do you think? How do you think the pandemic will impact the labor market, especially women employment? And what do you have to make of the short-term and long-term impacts of pandemic? Because we believe that maybe we can go back to normality and people will continue to work from home at least a couple of days a week. So what would be the impacts of that in the long term? Thank you very much, Melsa. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody for making a contribution to the making of this research. I'd like to thank the representatives of the partners of the project, stakeholders of the project, and I'd like to thank all the academics for making this research. So something attracted my attention, and especially 3 observations that I have to make. And then what could be the results for Turkey in the long and short term, especially when it comes to labor market participation and economic participation among women. First of all, demographic data we have to make reference to. When we look at the participants of research, when we make a gender segregation, 53% of the women are married and 74% of men are married. Do not forget about this demographic piece of data. And secondly, 58% of the participants are holding managerial positions, and they are making an income which is about a minimum wage. So we are talking about a privileged group of women. So a big majority of the participants, women participants, are privileged people, more privileged compared to the normal population, ordinary population. And 62% of the women holding managerial positions reported at least one type of violence in the last 3 months. And the third piece of observation is as follows. As some of these women experiencing violence would like to go back to the work life, and some others do not. Women, they normally prefer to stay home. There's an asymmetric preference here. Although women, they would like to stay home, men do not. So what these three piece of observations mean for Turkey, let me make an evaluation of it. And let me also talk about the results of another research that we conducted with Oya Ünlü. We also have shared results. We sent a survey to 339 to Comfort and to TÜSİAD members, and generally surveys were completed by the employers and HR managers. And this time in this research, we look at the perspectives of the employees, not the employers and the HR managers this time. And again, we come up against common shared problems, including violence, increased violence, and also asymmetric, unproportional burden on the shoulders of women because of working from home. So what does it mean for Turkey? First of all, in Turkey, according to 2019 data, only 66 out of 100 women participate in labor force, and 56% cannot participate in labor force because of their household burdens. So I think marital status and having small children are the biggest barriers for the women not to join the labor market. And secondly, employment rates. There's a 30% difference between men and women. Only 29% of the women participate in the labor force, whereas this is 63% among women. And what about young women and men? 47 out of 100 young women are NEET, NEET, as you know. They're neither in employment nor in training. And 23 of 100 men are NEET, NEET, in other words. In young women, every 1 out of 3 women are unemployed on the other hand. So in this research, we looked at generally the women holding managerial positions, but on the other hand, there is this other picture out there in the society, and generally we have shared results in our research, and everything was remarkably stated by the opening speakers. And let me once again repeat what they've said: inequality increase between men and women. And secondly, what matters here is, especially a result of our research, is as follows. In large corporations, in large businesses, they had on their agenda working from home for longer periods of time. So companies, they're coming up with some short-term solutions, and short-term solutions are liked by the enterprises or liked by the employees, because there is another option. For example, for women, they have to go back home and care for their children, care for the elderly. And on the other hand, in the long term, there will be negative impacts on the employers, on the businesses. So all the suggested solutions and recommendations should be consulted with the businesses, because remote working from home, is adopted under unusual circumstances at the moment, because the surveys conducted, research conducted may not be reflective of the reality, because this is not the normal reality. Maybe once the socialization starts, when normality starts, then there will be lots of problems occurring, including violation of rights to training, education, reproductive health, access to health services, education services. I mean, basic access to basic services. There will be inequalities when accessing basic services. So we have to consider the results of all these research from different perspectives. And let me conclude my remarks, and I'll take the floor again in the second round to utter a couple of remarks about what could be done about the recommendations. Ma'am, you have to unmute yourself. I'm sorry. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Statistics are important, but when we look at the data which are not statistical, they're also surprising. First of all, the marital status of the participants. This was important for me too, striking for me too. And also working women. The educational level of women holding managerial positions was generally higher than men. And this is one of the main results of the research, but this is this is one of the inequalities. Women are more educated, but they are holding less decision-making positions, fewer decision-making positions. That's what we see. And so you may be educated as a woman, but this is not enough for you to climb the ladders of your career. Because you may not be able to allocating enough time to networking in the business environment, etc. And also you may be exposed to discrimination. So you may be educated, more educated than your male counterparts as a woman, but still you may not be able to climb the ladders of the career very easily. Özge, I'd like to give the floor to Özge. And ask her what the report is telling her, and what do you have to make of the research, especially from the perspective of international initiatives, international organizations. What are on the agenda on the international organizations? Can you give us a global perspective to this research, and what the businesses can do for the future? What kind of policies can be adopted by the businesses? So what is discussed out there in the international platforms, and considering the legislation, new legislation and policies around the world?
Well, thank you. That is a very meaningful project, and the findings are very interesting and striking. As the research continues, it will continue demonstrating very valuable inputs for us. I hope that will be a long-term study, and it will continue enlightening us as it is doing now. And I am enjoying the great happiness of being a part of this study, and it's a great source of honor to be working in this project together with all dear colleagues. In fact, I will continue from where Emel left, and I would like to answer to the question, what should be done at micro level, I mean at company level. But before that, I would like to take one step back, and I would like to refer to some macro level of data. Of course, during the COVID-19 period, both male and female got affected. For example, they had different responsibilities, just like the care and some work responsibilities, and they got affected differently. Of course, we can look from a global level, and women in fact work in sectors or places with a higher risk of losing the job, and those who kept their job in fact, suffer from the increased care load because of the pandemic. You know, the schools locked down, and there is more workload coming from the patient care services, and they had to reduce their working hours at work. Or the second option was the burnout syndrome, and we saw this from Mahmoud's data. Um, this is not sustainable, you know, extended working hours without pay. In fact, the risk of losing the job is 1 times higher in women than women. In fact, women consist of or has a share of 54% in the lost jobs. And my data is most related to July and November reports. Of course, we're going to get more recent data, but we look at the country level, we can get more detailed data. For example, in the studies, we can see that in Canada, from April 2019 to April 2020, 16% of women lost their job, but 13% of men lost their job. And in Colombia, this is 29%, minus 29% for women, and minus 21% for the male. And of course, the young population is in a more vulnerable position. So the young men and young women lose jobs more easily. Then we should look who is at a higher risk and what are the expectations and what is underlying the negative expectations. Because women are employed in the business segments which will be affected more. And what are these sectors? For example, other services category, arts, entertainment, and also paid home labor and other personal services. In this sector, women has a share of 61%, and this is the sector which is most affected. And you know, all the sectors are redefined based on distance, and the sustainability of jobs is now defined by the personal contact and distance, and also accommodation and a catering sector. You know, across the world, 54% of the employees are female, and wholesale and retail again is affected much. 42% are women in this sector. In the manufacturing industry, there is mostly men in the world. However, for textile and also the clothes industry, we see an intensity of women, and the orders got cancelled in this sector, and it means that the employment of women in this sector is very vulnerable. So when you look at the overall picture, and also when you look at the sector level, 40% of the women, in fact, are located in the sectors which are most vulnerable, but men has a lower percentage in those sectors. Informal employment is, in fact, the most affected type of employment. 42% of women are employed informally. 42% work in these sectors. It means that even in the informal employment, they are still having a higher share in those sectors. And also we know that mid-level, mid-scale companies got affected more. And what about the vulnerability of women in these companies? Set aside the cascaded structure of gender and just look at equal distribution of male and female in an orderly company. Then it is up to the employer. If there will be very limited number of people to be hired, then who will be given the priority in terms of gender? A partial approach will dominate this decision. According to the global researches made with the employers, we understand that especially in South Asia, in Middle East, and similar areas, About 50% of the employers think that the men should be given priority in hiring and recruiting processes. And even in developed countries, 1/6 of the employers have this tendency. So with this tendency of the employers, the women are pushed to a more disadvantaged position. This is the situation by sectors of employment. And what about the care load? Again, I will present you the global perspective. 75% of the care load is undertaken and on the shoulders of women. So both Professors Mahmoud and Ahmed, in fact, show this in their studies. They show the Turkish perspective, but this is also the situation and is applicable for the global perspective. So there is the pandemic effect, the schools just closed down, and there is decreased mobility. You cannot send your child anywhere. There is no socializing at all. You have to cover all this gap. And there is increased care load, for example, caring of patients. 30% in India, in the United States, again, it's a significant ratio. I think it's plus 3 hours at average. And in conclusion, in fact, you already underlined this, and I'm coming back to the same topic. All around the world, now women cannot really sustain this, and now they are more inclined to get separated from the labor force. So I checked some countries with data. In the United States, 1/4 of women are intending to leave the labor. And also women with a child younger than 10 years of age. In fact, 54% of them are planning to quit the job. In male, this ratio is 13%. So now I can start talking about the micro level because the most affected groups include the working mothers, and also women in the managerial positions. They're also stuck. You see with the findings of this report, we can start talking about them because they're also not at ease. Because they say that they have already burned out. They clearly say this. They are saying, at least let's give some break because they cannot tolerate it anymore. Physically and mentally, they cannot tolerate it more. But however, it's very risky because it's not very easy to come back. If you want to come back, it will be very difficult. And the performance expectation at work does not change, and it's a great source of stress, and it's a great determining factor. We can say that even a higher performance level is expected because they say that there is no time lost, there is no exhaustion that is created by traffic and transportation. But, you know, we need to think over everything. I think in the second round, we will be discussing the policies. But I would like to talk, I wanted to talk about adversities first, and then we can talk about the policies. Of course, in this time period, there is a new feeling of separation. This is created by working from home. In the sample of this study, in fact, is included very interesting people. For example, people with the income level of over 4,000 Turkish lira. Almost 78% of women fall into this category. So it's a privileged group, as Emel mentioned. But what about the sustainability of the relations? When you work from home, you feel isolated and separated and disconnected. So the companies should start to take measures to avoid this. But, you know, when you're at home, you're always available. There are no time limits. There are no more clear boundaries between the household chores and the work, and the household chores never end for women. It's interesting for me to see in the report that when I look at the corporate policies, I see that in the sample, the most important thing was the health-related issues triggered by pandemic. For example, the ability to give care, health measures to be taken at their workplace, but unclear working hours, are not at the top places in the list. People are still, worried about their health. But what about working culture? We should all think about working culture, and this is related to policy. We can discuss this in the policy session. Well, also the performance assessment. This is also a major issue, a concern for women. Women are more afraid of losing their job than losing their hours or time. They're dominated by this fear. There was something interesting to me when I was reading the report. So it is related to flexibility. In many aspects, it can be disadvantages for the women in the working life, because the women start a working life already with some disadvantages, and all this flexibility can make them more disadvantaged. So we can try empathizing with these women, because these women will have increased care load, and there will be problems coming with working from home. But and also professionally, we can offer some alternatives and options or opportunity to these women. And which would be your preference? The business should also think about the equal opportunities. The business can say that, okay, I'm empathize with the women. I understand you have kids at home. The business can think of giving some opportunities or offering some opportunities, but that should never cause the women to be left behind. Because normally what we expect is encouraging the women for promotion and helping the women to pave their way for furthering their career. As for the policies, maybe I can talk about the risks. The risks are huge. So we need to rethink the work concept. Based on context at workplaces, they redefined the work and the works. Now, this is not about professions or occupations. Now, this is about single activities that are used to define the works. This is how they design the new future. I don't know what it will look like and what should be done to build an equal world. I think it's better to discuss these in the second round. Yes, thank you very much, Özge. Since you already referred to this, I would like to mention that Özge is one of the authors. She wrote a chapter, in fact, in the related book. That book was published in English in 2019, and it was electronically one of the most downloaded books related to human rights. And the Turkish version of that book can be will be accessible in 2021. The Turkish version will be available this year. Özge touched upon a very interesting phenomenon. The work, the things to do never finish. And we see it in the report. A significant number of participants reported that they work 7 days a week. These are not mine workers. You see, these are white-collar people and academicians. It means that there are no more clear boundaries between private life and work life. And also we can talk about the tendencies. You see, the life expectancy is extended. It means that the number of elderly people who need care is increasing, and that burden will again be on the shoulders of women unless there are structural changes made. Özge also talked about or referred to mental health, and here at this point, maybe we can give the floor to Mrs. Ufuk Sezgin. What happens to the mental health of women in all these world. We talked about the local dynamics, international dynamics, the relations between the organized behavior, disorganized behavior, but what about the human being itself? What about the woman itself? What about the impact of all these practices on our mental health? There are many topics that are not covered by this study, but maybe built on your personal experience and clinical experience, maybe you can enlighten us about the mental health part. Thank you, Ufuk, in advance. Thank you. Hello to everyone. I would like to thank all those who are a part of this valuable study, which includes precious information, and the amount of information should be increased and it should be scaled up and extended so that we can make progress. I'm going to present you two perspectives. Well, there's certainly we see that some challenges are highlighted. For example, bodily pains, pessimism, difficulty in concentration, bodily pains, anger, hesitation, nervousness, and difficulty in decision making. Some psychological issues are already mentioned in this study. And of course, in this environment that we are living in, there are various reasons for them. And there is also the violence against women, which has already been emphasized by many speakers. And in fact, I'm not going to make links between violence against women and the environment we are in, but now, since we are in the pandemic period, we can talk about our observations. For example, the number of people coming to my institution and applying, and also people working in the field. In this morning, by the way, let me say that I work in a medical faculty. So in the morning, there was one person who came for the COVID-19 vaccination. The person was 70-year-old, a female. And in fact, I noticed that she was exposed to violence. In order to get the vaccination, she had to roll up her sleeve, and the people just noticed the traces of violence. And also, let me refer to the healthcare professionals who really sacrificed their lives without hesitation throughout this process. So with their delicacy, in fact, it was possible to reveal that violence case, and maybe we will do more of this. You know, Mo Chatı, the Women's Shelter Foundation, Mr. Mohtashami referred to the inaccessibility of contraceptives and unplanned pregnancy for women, and also that Women's Shelter Foundation, Mor Chatı, has one more finding. Even after the unplanned pregnancy, the women cannot get abortion because the abortion conditions are very limited, and their access to those means and conditions is very limited. It is not about access to healthcare services. It's also related to political systems. So they have to give birth to unplanned or unwanted children. This is another aspect. And also, Mrs. Safkan talked about the stress factor. Well, yes, we're talking about a certain stress factor, but the women share the same environment. So most of them were already exposed to violence. You know, Kamer Women's Foundation. So if there are any women who would like to get psychological support, they provide a certain service to those women. And I also provide supervision. They reached out to 300 women. In fact, the women share the same environment as the perpetrator of the violence, and they have no space to take a breath. And that's even a bigger problem. They share the same environment as the perpetrator. Also, about my clinical experience, I can say the following. so far, maybe we didn't see so many applicants, so many clients for this course. Sometimes we see people already have a history of violence, an old history of violence. These are traumatic experiences for the victim of the violence, and sometimes the individual can cope with this, or sometimes it was possible for the individual to get away from that environment, at least for a while, and at least the individual can take a breath. But now it is not possible. They have to share the same environment for an extended or long time period. They are sharing the same environment with the perpetrator. And also it is about your internal processes, the violence, the lack of tolerance, the exposure, but there is more than those. Now the past experiences come back, the traumas come back. They start to think about the past more and more. In fact, I'm a lecturer, academician working in the forensic medicine. And now there are more people who would like to report and complain about past violence or incest or the spousal violence or the violence from the father. We see a higher number of complaints and reporting of past events. You can see some examples on the social media. There are more disclosures now, disclosures of past events. There is more disclosure of past now on social media because people are now by themselves. They are dealing with their inner world more and more, and this is the outcome of this increased action with your inner world. So the companies should think once again about their policies if they are planning to switch to remote working, because one aspect is violence, increased workload is another aspect, and also there is social isolation. This condition will have certain impacts on the mental health of people. What is social isolation? Well, some objective contact is missing from your social interaction. For some organisms, it might not be a big problem, but a human being is a social organism. It's a huge problem. You can be left alone, you can be left isolated, and you can feel more depressed. You can have more mental challenges to cope with. And in fact, in one university, there was an epidemiological study. The result says that coronary cardiac diseases and paralysis risk are highly associated with increased social isolation. Well, I don't know, scientists working in this field can say a lot more about this, but we hear a lot of cardiac arrest cases. And yesterday we lost a very young academician because of cardiac arrest. And in the gerontology journal, there was one study. Isolation increases the risk of dementia by 40%. Likewise, in the American Journal of Epidemiology, there is another study published. Again, it's about social isolation. Social isolation is highly correlated to early mortality, and the Disease Prevention Centers in the United States say that isolation is a great disease risk. So if there's an insistence on this remote working, and if people say that, okay, the individuals are already willing to work from home, and if the company managers are seriously thinking about working from home, please think it over and over and over. This is my suggestion. I will give my further recommendations later on. Thank you. That's all for me.
Professor Ufuk, can we start with you this time? You underlined very important issues, ma'am, Professor Ufuk. And I may add on to that as follows: especially after the first quarantine, there has been a lifting of restrictions for some time. And during that time, there has been increased cases of breaks, fractures in legs, in arms, because when they were working from home, they had to use their extremities less. But once the restrictions were lifted, people started to break their extremities more frequently, and the burden on the orthopedicians increased accordingly. So, coming back to you, ma'am, what do you think businesses have to do? What kind of policies they can adopt? I'm sure there are many things that we have not covered yet. What do you have to say, ma'am? Well, there are important results of the report as we have seen it. There are all important, beg your pardon, Ufuk, ma'am, if I may. Self-confidence is so much important, right? So talking of policies and measures adopted and to be adopted by the businesses and enterprises, we need to also talk about how women can increase self-confidence, what kind of actions businesses can take in order to increase self-confidence on the side of the women. What do you think, ma'am? The thing is, I may have two types of recommendations. One is, everybody has been talking about how to eliminate violence against women. We have to take the time to talk about how to eliminate violence against women. Some establishing systems to eliminate violence are important, and there are certain systems that emerged in Spain and then got disseminated in the Western world. I am talking about presence of systems where the violence can be reported. Let me put it that way. Women are going to the pharmacist and they may report there. They may go to the pharmacist, and there is this system. So if a woman goes to a pharmacist and say, for example, mask 119, then this is a code. Actually, this is a coded statement, which means that that woman is being exposed to violence, and the referrals are made accordingly. And today, women cannot have access to services very easily, especially when it comes to psychological health. Online systems have to be established for women to have easier access to psychological services. And when it comes to self-confidence, increased self-confidence and resilience is important, especially considering white-collared women. Now they have to stay home, and they cannot develop their self-care skills. They cannot go to the hairdressing anymore. They cannot easily do bodily care anymore. These are something that they're normally used to. These are important for women to feel better, to have increased self-confidence. But under the circumstances brought about by COVID-19, they cannot enjoy this anymore. But there are certain things individuals can do to be facilitated by their organizations and businesses. For example, some activities, exercise programs, music programs can be done. Meditation or praying might be an option. If they want to meditate and pray, let them do it. And this way, they can somehow better cope with the stress brought about by the isolated life. And another important suggestion and recommendation would be following out with the daily routine. You see me today, right? I put on makeup, and it is like I'm not at home, but I'm in the workplace. I'm on the stage talking to you. I feel like that. So I think this daily routine should be kept and should not be quit by women, and this will also increase their self-confidence, and it will also help you develop a feeling of normality. Plus, they can maintain healthy behaviors, including sleeping and also eating. But unfortunately, under the circumstances brought about by COVID-19, people have to work at like midnight today. They have to text at midnight. And people are texting you at midnight and expecting answer from your side at midnight. This was not the case in the past before the pandemic. And this is something extraordinary. But if we can, follow our regular routine of sleeping. I see people, they're going to bed at 2 or 3 o'clock at midnight, and they have to wake up early in the morning. Well, this is something that we have to abandon. We have to move on to our normal, regular life, including physical activities, and we have to stay connected because we are social creatures, and we have to stay connected. Maybe we cannot be connected in physical environments, but we can stay connected over the phone, etc. So we have to stay connected, and we have to make use of solidarity and support mechanisms accordingly. This is what we need to do. And also considering the circumstances brought about by COVID-19, there is a huge level of concern and despair, uncertainty on the side of the people. People do not know what will happen to them, whether they'll get ill or something. That's why they have to be aware. Being aware and being informed is absolutely important. But misinformation about COVID-19 is that dangerous on the other side, because everybody is coming up with a piece of information which might be considered misinformation. That's why I'm not watching TV to learn about COVID-19, by the way, because overexposure to information and sometimes misinformation may be dangerous. You may follow the Turkish Medical Association's website or WHO website, WHO statements. That's what I follow, not the others, not the media coverage, etc. Because media may contribute to the increased misinformation, dissemination of misinformation among the people. Plus, some of the people, when they go back to normal life, they'll be afraid of getting socialized, doing normal activities. That's why they have to be careful. We have to be careful. But some women will also need psychological and psychological and then psychiatric support. When do they need psychiatric support, you may ask, especially if women are perplexed, if people are perplexed, if they are hallucinating, if they cannot manage their anger anymore, and if they are changing moods very frequently, if they cannot manage their daily problems anymore, and if they are in a depressive mood for a long time, and if they have been experiencing such symptoms for a long time, if they've been experiencing physical strain for a long time on top of psychological pain, if they want to be isolated willingly from the people, and if they want to, and if they resort to substance abuse, etc., then psychiatric assistance should be sought after. Professional support, professional assistance should be resorted to. There are lots of services out there for you, but organizations, businesses should also closely monitor their employees in case they may need psychiatric support, psychological support. That is it from my side. Thank you very much. That was it. If you have any questions, I can take the floor later again to answer the questions. I'd like to give the floor back to Mahmoud. So let's talk about organizations, not the individuals anymore. What do you think businesses can do, organizations can do? What kind of recommendations you can make for them, considering the results of the research? Thank you very much, Melsa, Professor. Thank you. Lots of recommendations I might list. Too many, indeed. Income, when it comes to income distribution, there is this inequality which is troubling me. And which brings me to talk about minimum wage in Turkey, how minimum wage is low in Turkey, because the low level of minimum wage contributes to the inequality in income earning. Because sometimes men are using the excuse of low income they have when they resort to violence against women. So I think this is an area of work to be considered. Many businesses in Turkey, especially during the pandemic, reduced the salaries of their employees. And they are generally providing minimum wage, not higher. Normally, these businesses can provide psychological support to their employees. And this is also important for women. Women are holding less than managerial positions.
You know, the fertility and also advancement in career in fact overlap in the timeline. It means that the women have a higher load at the work and at home, and we should also take this into consideration very carefully, because it's about the potential of promotion for women. On one hand, yes, we should try to keep this potential high, but you know, empathizing with the women is not enough to help and support them, and we should help them. Increased minimum wage or a significant improvement in the salaries. Yes, these are one aspect of the phenomenon. But what about the working hours? About 50% of the working population, in fact, work 50 hours. But according to legislation, it's 45 hours, but very easily one can go beyond this with over work. But in Europe, this average is about 35 to 40 hours, and the minimum wage is higher as well. You see, less working hours, higher minimum wage. It means that in those countries, women can be empowered more, but this is just the opposite in Turkey, because the working hours are not the same here, and also the remuneration they get for those working hours is far less compared to the men. So it's a great challenge. So the companies should act proactively. Regardless of the legislation in effect in the country, they should be able to make some corrections. Okay, in the legislation, maybe it's written 45 hours, but they can target 40 hours. It may be possible to pay more than the minimum wage. The companies may speculate about this, at least a little bit. There are some studies associated with this. When the remuneration is increased, in fact, performance is improved, productivity is improved. It means that the companies, the businesses will have a more productive environment. Their operations will be more efficient and more productive, and the employees will be generating more for the business. And correct salary means good productivity. Let's also talk about the organizational support. So when there is a better organizational support, in fact, there will always be a feedback. So when there is some support coming from the organization towards the employee will respond back positively with an increased feedback to the organization, to the union. Of course, it is also important to have a good performance management system. Sometimes under this pretext, the managers increase their expectations with no regard to the pandemic conditions. And I have a recommendation to the managers and administrators here. Throughout the pandemic, or let's say at the end of 2021, probably you are planning to have a performance assessment interview, but cancel all these performance assessments because these will be funny, and do not try to measure performance by looking at the number of hours when the computer was on. So if you would like to empathize, do it by this way, not only for women, but for all the employees. At least postpone the performance assessment interviews and show some more understanding. Thank you, that's all for me. I can pass the floor to other panelists. Well, thank you very much. Once the women get married, they leave the job by getting their severance payment. Maybe that should be paid when they are back to work. That can be some kind of motivation for the women to go back to work once the baby is grown. That can be a good headline for the newspapers, you see, cancel the severance payment. We don't know what to compare. Are we comparing the apples with pears? I don't know. It's very difficult. So the organization, I mean, the trade unions, labor organizations, in fact, they are at a very low level in Turkey, and their weak position, in fact, it is not today's topic, but at least we may make a reference to this. Employers' organizations are very strong, and they are adapting themselves more sensitively to the global changes. But what about the labor unions? Maybe they should start playing a more active role in the labor life by changing the focal point, I don't know, by changing the voices. That can be the new era. Now, I'd like to make a shift from the companies to the micro level, and I would like to give the microphone to Özge now. She already had started touching upon the future policies and tendencies, and later on, Emel is going to take the floor to give you the biggest or the most macro picture. But first, Özge, please. Well, yes, speaking of tendency, as we all agreed, the tendencies are against women unless we take any intervention. So this is not a good progress. For example, child care labor. The public and the private sectors should devise some solutions for this, and it may be done with longer term policies, but even in the short term, some care support should be there and increased, and prejudices should be fighted in a stronger way. And you know, there is a restriction in public spendings now, and it has an adverse effect on the women's education. And in recovery policies, we cannot be gender blind. And in some sectors, women are more intensive, and we should think about their weight in the sectors when we are planning about recovery. If we pursue or continue with a gender blind policy, it will not be good. And when I look at the OECD countries' projections, even if we double the gender equality policies with this assumption, only by 2030 we can go back to what it was like before the pandemic. So even before the pandemic, the gender equality it was stagnant. With the pandemic, everything, you know, was reversed and rolled back. So we need a transformation in the perspective, in the vision. I can start with the public policies and continue with the corporates. As for the public policies, of course, there should be more effort to prevent loss of jobs on the women's side, and financial policies are extremely important. It's important to have this discussion for our country, because you know that during the COVID period, when you look at the IMF data, you see that the developed economies did successfully do it. They had the power. They spent 22% of their national income for COVID-related expenditures, but in developing countries like us, it is limited to 6%. In emerging economies, it's somewhere like 2 to 4%. So public support is important. Now, let me talk about the life after the pandemic. So this is about the long-run consequences. The companies said that they will not go back to the past. I mean, basically, they want to say that the works, in fact, are designed differently for future, because now they take into consideration the contacts, and in the multinational companies we see there is a tendency for use of robots and also artificial intelligence. So the adoption of robots and artificial intelligence will be faster. That will be the new digital revolution that we're going into, and that greater speed is brought by pandemic. E-commerce increased by 2 to 5 folds, and computer-related works can be done remotely by 70%. So the companies now have the opportunity. You know, there is division of labor, and they can go and look back to their employees, their work processes, and now they are trying to make a combination, cost optimization, and optimization of all the processes. And remote working is expected to increase by 25% in developed countries, and in the developing countries it will increase by 15%. So it is possible to hire someone from any place of the world without bearing any costs. And now there is this accessibility. So they will have a pool of employees, and that pool is very flexible, a very elastic pool for the companies, and that will be the new tendency for the companies. What about switching to the modality of working from home? We see in the report that there is a considerable group of people who are satisfied with or pleased with working from home. What does that mean? You know, before the pandemic, we talked about this a lot. You know, Emel, you and I talked about this a lot. We were deprived of time. We didn't have enough time in our lives. You know, we were at such a level that we couldn't regenerate ourselves. We didn't have the power to regenerate ourselves. We didn't have the time to spend with our children. So this new pandemic period introduced us a new reality. By going to work, we were running away from responsibilities. But when we were back at home, the responsibilities were there waiting for us again. Now we see all these responsibilities on daily basis, pending over us, because our working order was not humane. It was improper. So that was the meaning, big meaning of going back to home with the pandemic. That was an important finding of the study, and this study really revealed this very successfully. It looks like the business world is seeking a big transformation in relation to the characteristics of the working life for future. Well, in the studies, we see that the minorities, women, people with lower education level will be disadvantaged because of works. The work processes will change. For the first time in 2030, the lower paid works will diminish. You see, the unqualified working force should be getting some more training to be qualified. And this used to be normally put into nice words in the reports, but retraining now is a reality, and gender equality in retraining will be important. People also quickly people are quickly changing their place of work, and the salaries, the remunerations should be replanned. For example, people are going back to the villages and rural, and can multinational companies readjust the remunerations? Can they contribute to the moving or transportation costs for relocation? These are all very new concepts to discuss. And Emel said it very nicely. This is a huge transformation. And Ufuk also put it very nice words. In this big transformation, can we not defend our lives? Can we not defend the way that we would like to enjoy our habits? Big crises, in fact, can bring about big opportunities, but also they can steal from our quality of life. And think about the disadvantaged groups that are even at a worse situation. So we should think from the lens of human rights. Okay, a company will say that, okay, forget about your diploma. I'm going to redefine all the workplaces. Okay, you may want to move your house. I can pay for your moving costs, etc., etc. But, what about our expertise? What about the wholeness and integrity of our work? What about the meaning of our work? We should be able to defend all these. Please think from or look through the lens of human rights. Is it going to be a big wave, and is it going to flood us, or are we going to reach a better position as regards human rights? So all across Europe, there is an agenda that the business world is closely following. This is the human rights due diligence legislation. Well, European Commission, and also some leading countries, member of the Commission, in fact, arguing this. They say that the business should take responsibility. Let this be a social responsibility. In fact, the consequence of extreme inequality will not be good, will not be rational. So rather than practices based on goodwill, binding rules will be introduced to defend human rights, fair trade, no damage to the environment, manufacturing processes that are committed to basic principles, sanctions and obligations will be the part of this new process, this new era. Let me conclude by saying that you remember 2008 global financial crisis. So the populations paid the price, and a more controlled financing world was expected, but now we see that the rules of the game didn't change much. Now this crisis is even bigger. We don't know if this is the end of humanity. We don't know what our generation will witness. Our lifestyle will have to be changed for good and for all. That will be the consequence of this process. And so there is an argument saying that we cannot continue to live as we used to. I hope all these arguments will end up at a meaningful place. It's all about efforts of ours, efforts of the business. So with some attempt, everything can be made more sustainable. We should ask for the better, and we should ask for this all together. Well, this age is called the Anthropocene, and this biological and physical world is influenced by the human beings. We cannot miss the element of human nature here. In fact, before this panel, before this launching event, I delivered a speech today. So this is Anthropocene, and I asked, can we make the Anthropocene a human age? This is the responsibility lying before us. Well, governments, civil society, and the business world should have respect for the environment and the human beings and rights. That's a big paradigm, and the role of the academy is related to this paradigm shift. There will be new discussions, new perspectives. I think the biggest contribution will come from the women. Will come from the women's opinions. If we empower the women more, then we can make the Anthropocene a human age. Now, Emma, I would like to give the floor to you. What about your macro perspective? What should we do to make this Anthropocene a human age? Well, that is a beautiful question. So a macro approach is very dear to me. So there are feminist economists who have been thinking about this for years, you know, and there were some authors writing about environmental justice. So in order to further improve the human life, economy, science, in fact, has a purpose. Some authors were already speaking about this. Of course, we need a paradigm shift in practice, but of course, there are always ideas and opinions. And the experiences feed the opinions. So the ideas are not the individual creations of academicians. So I will go from the macro to micro. It's important. We already had a previous study and we saw some good practices at corporate level. I can give you some factual examples, some concrete examples. There were some companies who tried to find essential answers to important questions. First, they tried to identify the problem. It's critical to pinpoint the problem. Here we're talking about a change of experience. And then the companies just preferred taking steps. In fact, a very limited number of companies just took this way, but they did something differently compared to other companies. And what was the difference? It has already been mentioned by dear academicians. Commitment to the equality principles. The companies making this commitment, in fact, made a difference, both at observational level and at statistical level. UN Women and UN Global Compact put into implementation the equality principles in 2002. And some companies made a signatory and also started implementing this. Almost half of the companies, in fact, did this. So when the companies made this commitment, although all these companies were similar in terms of the number of employees, size, etc., we saw that those companies made a difference in terms of the measures, for example, measures against violence. That is very meaningful. Especially the companies which are part of BADV, they showed very different results. I think this is a supportive argument. Of course, the companies cannot have an excuse. So the company cannot try to explain this with economic grounds or economic reasons, or, you cannot try to associate this with differences in position, for example, a managerial position. But let me give another example. The companies recognize the fact that we should all sit down together and struggle against manhood. So there are a great number of men who are ready to support us and who are standing by us. So some companies already started, informing their staff. There was an important finding in your study. Although many individuals who were exposed to violence, they didn't report this to their company. Some companies have hotlines working on 7/24 basis. Some companies offer psychological support. And for the households where there are members over 65 years old, some companies support their employees so that they can work at their selected hours. So some companies took the steps. In fact, I don't have the figures with me, but the figures are very small. And mostly you can see this kind of practices in large-scale companies. And in small and medium-scale companies, the situation is not like this. It is like what we discussed before. It's necessary to have cooperation between them. So cooperating with NGOs, cooperating with the public sector will be useful because then discussions can be made extensively and the companies may be made to take responsibilities. There are also some examples from Turkey. Those examples can be disseminated, can be scaled up. That will be an important contribution. So I can stop here. I just tried to give some concrete examples of good practices. Now, please, I can say something about the macro level. Short-term expectations, a myopia perspective, cost restrictions, they cannot be the starting point. You can call it a big transformation or whatever name you give this. We don't want to go back to the old normality and we would like to formulate a new normality altogether, and the private sector, the public sector should recognize this desire, and also the employees. They have certain expectations, they have certain desires, and their voice should be heard. That is an important result of your report. Thank you for all the efforts. Well, thank you. We have exceeded our time slightly, but I think all these discussions were inspiring for all of us, and they're encouraging our future studies. In fact, we may, I don't know, serve the individual speeches of each panelist separately on YouTube. Maybe we can create a document covering all these, because that discussion was a very rich one. Now I have so many questions on my mind that I will directly start thinking about the answers, how to do what. But anyway, I have to conclude the discussion, and let me conclude by saying that in future, the working life will be redesigned. And in this redesigning period, a feminist perspective is an absolute need, and women should lead this redesigning process. If we cannot make this, I think the robots will do all the work for us and we will go back to breastfeeding. That cannot be the case. All the individuals should be able to walk in their preferred way, and they should have the work opportunities as they like. They should have the opportunity of engaging in life, engaging in economy. As Mahmoud Bayazid said, men who are familiar with these problems should be a part of the process, but the leaders should be the women. We can only design the future through consultation and through mutual learning. Thank you all, Sevda, Firuze, all members of the team, and the organizers. Thank you for the event. All the supporters and participants, thank you for coming and being a part of this. You spent a long duration of the day in front of the computer monitor. Thank you very much for doing this. Goodbye. Stay safe.